he's more muscular. But let's hear what Stink had to say. Let's check it out.
This is a stacked roster, but they start with toughness. Their general manager, Brad Holmes, has done a really good job of putting people in place. I love the Detroit Lions. You walk into that building, the energy in that building is through the roof, and I credit Dan Campbell for that.
Do you think Dan Campbell dials back the aggressiveness, the go for it nature a little bit this year after what happened last year?
No,
you don't think so?
I don't. I think that's the way he wants to play. He wants to, and he just wants to be like, hey man, I want to take my guys knowing that the odds are we're going to go for it on fourth down, takes the pressure off on third down. They have more duality on third down than any team in the NFL.
Fair point.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, based on what he said, we'll start with stacked roster, energy in the building. It's something we talk about all the time. And you get to the second part about the question that Carlos asked about Dan Campbell's aggressiveness. He's pretty certain. He's like, I ain't stopping. That's Dan Campbell. That's what they want to do. And he actually makes a good point, fellas, about how it gives them more. They're more relaxed on third because they know.
I've never even thought about that. Like, I guess that's something you don't think about unless you're like in the building. But like,
yeah,
when you know you're going for it on fourth down, I guess when you are going into a mindset, hey, it's 4 down territory, you know what to expect. But that's interesting to think. I also heard, who was it? Someone mentioned it a couple days ago on a show that brought up like, hey, do you think Dan Campbell will stop as well? And he said no, because they built essentially like this Lions team, they're like built off of that, like being tough and going for it on fourth down and living by that. And whoever it was brought it up. Someone in the chat might have seen the same video I did, but they brought up the Alex Anzalone situation. Remember how Alex Anzalone, after the season was over, did the players tribute with, I think it was The Athletic, and came out and he mentioned like about the fourth down thing, about how they weren't kicking field goals and going for it in the NFC Championship game. And they were like, would you do that over again? And tell Dan, like, hey, we need to kick field goals. And we can't keep going for it. And he was like, no, because that's how over the last 2 or 3 years, this Detroit Lions team got to where they were, was being aggressive, just being absolute dogs, playing with grit and saying, we're gonna bite your kneecaps off. And with that, biting kneecaps, what that comes is going for it on fourth down, making those big time plays, making those moves, fake punts, things like that. And like, that's their identity. So when you do think about it, like a guy like Alex Anzalone, who's on the defensive side of the ball, who probably hates it if you go for it on fourth down, because then that puts them in bad positions. He's like, yeah, we're all in. Like, if Dan wants to do it, we're doing it. And we're not changing that, because that's who we are. So when I heard that, and you put all the building blocks together, it's like, they're not going to change. They won't. Yeah. We could have Jake Bates all we want. Dan Campbell's going to be a Dan Campbell.
And that's what I've been trying to preach this whole time, because even in the playoff games, it's 3rd and 9 and they're running Jahmyr Gibbs and he's picking up the first down, like untouched. Yeah. That's when the Philadelphia Eagles were on their run in the Super Bowl, everyone talks about when you have the tush push, you are playing with 4 offensive downs, because on third down, you can run or pass. You can be 3rd and 5 and you run it. If you're 2 yards short, okay, tush push. You can find a way. And when you talk about, instead of needing to get 4 yards every play, you can get 3. That's just how this offensive game plan is run. And if you look at Ben Johnson, you can look at his play calls and be like, well, he likes going for it on fourth down as well. You can see he has these play calls constructed on third down to set up fourth down. And that's just the identity of this team. And defensively, if I'm a defensive player, I love it, because it's showing that your coach trusts you to make a play. And if he's doing it last year with that personnel, especially in the secondary, getting this revamped defense, I'd say go for it more. Go for it more, because this team's only going to get better. And when you can just keep capitalizing on plays, which I think this team is just full of playmakers. If you look at Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta, they're so good just after contact. David Montgomery, this offense is built to be able to do it. It's not just gimmicky game plays that you can have Tom Kennedy thrown to Khalif Raymond down the sideline. Like, no, this team is built to be able to do it. And it just goes all back to the identity of Dan Campbell. So they're not changing. They never will. Yeah. Never will.
I will say, okay, I was just letting it simmer for a little bit. Okay. I don't have a problem with who Dan is. It's obviously worked because they've gotten as far as they did. And the players have loyalty because Dan, they trust what he says, and it turns into wins, and they have success. So like, I'm not here to say to change everything, but Dan Campbell, there's also a point in time where, the saying, it's like brains and brawn. It's like the physical strength and the brains. Like, he's got the physical strength, the toughness. But then there's that part where I think people mistake him for not having brains in some instances. Now, going forward, I think it comes with experience, being in certain situations, doing one thing, learning, and being like, okay, maybe next time if I'm ever in this situation again, I'll do this. Like, kicking the field goals in the after being aggressive in the NFC Championship game, where people kind of gave him flack for that. It's like learning when to do it in certain game situations. But what I will say is, it's not bad to be aggressive. More and more coaches are starting to do it because Dan Campbell has shown he's doing it. He's like, F it, I'm going for it. And other teams have taken that and ran with it. But I don't want the Lions' identity just to be go for it all the time. Like, it just doesn't. There's coaches, even the best coaches, don't always go for it. And they have great. They have Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. They still will they'll punt it and play special teams and play field position. And I think having Jack Fox, you just got to keep that in mind. Like, there was a game I went to last year. I think it might have been Thanksgiving against the Packers, where they're on their own 20-yard line and they go for it. And it didn't work out, and the Packers scored in 2 plays. Like, that stuff frustrates me. I'm not going to lie. Like, but if it's timely and it's situationally it makes sense, then yeah, I'm on board. Like, I don't agree with, if you're going to be aggressive, you got to be aggressive all the time. Like, it comes a time where you have to be like, okay, does this make sense? Like,
yeah.
And maybe when they have a better defense,
I do think
you're better off going for it in certain situations because you can trust your defense, but that's the only thing. The fake punt. That's what it was, Ryan. Thank you. I was in attendance. I'm like, fuck, watching the Lions. But I get. I don't want him to change his entire identity. I'm not saying that at all. But just be smart with it.
I do think there's a feel to it, if that makes sense. Because when you kind of do break it down, there's like, as an NFL head coach, you still want to keep opposing teams on their heels, whether they think like they're thinking, oh, they're going to go for it, or hey, they're going to punt, or whatever it is. Like, because say you throw the punt team out there and you do a fake punt, it's not going to work if you're just faking it every time. Or same with the field goal. So like, you do have to kind of keep the other team questioning a little bit. But I don't know where you guys are at with it, but the analytics side of things now going in the NFL, it's kind of turning more so to where coaches do look at that, going for 2 instead of kicking a field goal, going for it on 4th down, because the analytics say you have a better chance of going for it. And then if you don't get it, get the stop and do this. Like, there's a lot of things trending the directions, like you said, Jeff, of coaches going for it more, being more aggressive, especially when it comes to kicking field goals or going for 2, like they did in the Dallas game. Like, do you guys remember the Dallas one? Instead of kicking the field goal to force OT, they go for it and they keep going for it. And then they kept going for it, even though like there was the flags. And so like, there are situations like that to where maybe, and then I think Dan might have said it before, maybe there's situations to where after the first 2 times, you're like, all right, maybe we should just kick the field goal. But like, that is part of the NFL nowadays with analytics and all of that. But it doesn't mean like Dan, if you go, like, he's kicked field goals throughout the season. Like, Michael Badgley wasn't, him and Riley Patterson, they did not have a job. Like, they were out there kicking field goals, just like the Rams field goal kick in the playoffs. Like, they still were kicking field goals. It was just more so situationally. And I think Dan just needs to, like, not that he needs to get a better feel for it, but I think he will as time goes on. Like, hey, these are the right situations to do it. When you're up, 20 or 17 points, you don't have to be as aggressive as you would if you're only up 7 points to force it to a 10-point game. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think there's different situations in different games and meetings and things like that, to where you start to get that feel for that, especially for your team. How's your defense playing? How's the offense? Like, are they able to get the ball? Like, you know what I mean? I think it's a feel for the game. What's the word? We used to use that all the time in our post-game shows, Jeff, when we talked about it. It's just like feeling the game, like knowing the situation.
Yeah, I would say adaptability. It's like being able to adapt to dirt. You have to be adaptable. And that's why and I love Gerald. I do. And he's not the first. I've seen this a lot. It's like, oh, when it works, I think Niels used to say this. When it works, you're on board, but when it doesn't, you're not. No, there's even times where it works where you're like, whew, like maybe that it wasn't smart. Again, he's a head coach for a reason, but it's not about what, I don't agree. And maybe I'm on an island with this, but I don't. It's, if you're going to go for it every single time. I think there's a time and a place. It's like, subjective in a way where it depends on the, like you said, Boone, you said it perfectly. It's like a lot of things you have to take into consideration, right? Like how your defense is playing, where you at, down in distance, or, what time of the game is it? How big of a game? What's the score? How much time on the clock? Like, there's stuff where maybe that can dictate the decision. But again, he's going to be aggressive most of the time, and I accept that. But man, it's like there's a difference between being aggressive and being like reckless, like that's where I don't want it to get to. And I don't think Dan's done that yet. Like it's been pretty solid. I know even though he got shit for the NFC Championship game, I won't even bring that up. It's in the past. There's a lot of things that happen, like Jahmyr Gibbs fumbling or Josh Reynolds dropping balls on 4th down. Like it's not, I wouldn't say that was all Dan Campbell, but just keep in mind moving forward, like you're going to be competing for Super Bowls, and with that, stakes are higher, right? Yes. Like stakes increase. Now you're not just competing to get to the playoffs. You're going to be playing in huge games.
Yeah, and to be fair,
good head coaches and good teams.
To be fair with that, and if people want to like to that point, well, you're good with if you you're good when they convert, and you're mad when they don't convert. Like, no, that's not the thing. It's, if we're being honest, if Dan Campbell wasn't trying to figure out the right times to do it, he just wouldn't have a kicker. Like Riley Patterson and Michael Badger wouldn't have a job at all. Like they wouldn't touch the field at all. It is very well known. Like Dan does. There are times where he kicks field goals. Like he's still like, go look at their stats. They still kick field goals. So he's shown to be like, we still need to do it, and we need to do it in the right situations. I think it comes down to him just kind of getting that feel for the game, because there's no one in the NFL like Dan Campbell. Like, let's just call it what it is. This is the first time in NFL history, in my opinion, where you've seen a head coach do what he does consistently, to where he's trying to figure this thing out with analytics and kind of him just being like, let's be dogs here and let's go bite kneecaps and go for it. You've never seen this on a legit, very, very good football team like Dan Campbell. So this is like a one of a kind thing. He's still trying to figure out and make sure like he's learning. And like that's where I think people kind of get caught up a little bit, to where they're like, oh, you just have to try. Like, no, Dan's kind of on our side a little bit, to where he's looking at it and being like, when's the best time to do it? When's the best time to kick? When's the best time to go for it? Like, he doesn't go out there and go for it 100% of the times. He still punts the ball. Jack Fox is still a punter in the NFL. Yeah, so weapon. Dan is still trying to figure it out. When Dan Campbell figures it out fully 100%, and I'm sure he'll go back in that 49ers game and he's able to pick and choose and say, I should have done this. When he figures it out and he gets that kind of aggressiveness down to a T, like kind of Andy Reid has his offense down, like that type of stuff, like on that type of level, then this Dan Campbell football team with the talent that they have is going to be dangerous, because Dan's going to know them back. Like, he's going to become an elite head coach. And it's just going to be his own style. Just like Andy Reid coaches his own style. Like, Sean Payton coaches his own way. All these guys coach their own ways. Dan Campbell coaches his own way. And part of that is finding the right times to be aggressive and finding the right times to go for it. So, like, if there's people out there that are like, no, let Dan be Dan, he's still trying to figure it out too. And I think that's like, he would probably tell you the same exact thing, I'm sure.
Well, speaking of being aggressive, no, go on, Lucas.
I was gonna say, this personnel wise, anything outside of 5 yards, like I can understand like getting pissed over, but from like 4th and 5 and in, like that's just, this offense is so hard to match up with, especially if J-Mo emerges, because if you have J-Mo pushing back the safeties, like think about how easy it is to have Sam Laporte on a hitch route, Amon-Ra St. Brown run an out route. One of those two guys are getting open, especially if it's in zone coverage, because they can just sit down. And when you have Jared Goff, who just knows how to throw in all the spots, I'm telling you, especially with this new kick return rule, they're probably going to be going for it more, because they're going to have shorter fields most of the time.